Mankind likes to think in terms of extreme opposites.
For John Dewey, this was the main problem in education in the early 1900s. Education was at a crossroads. The Great War had ended, proving America's dominance in the world. The United States was going through an ongoing financial crisis that seemed to have no end in sight. And more children from every race, national origin, class, and gender had a chance to gain knowledge through formal education. In 1900, only 10% of eligible high school-age children were exposed to a formal education, and the purpose of that education was to prepare those students for college. In 1950, 85% of high school-age students attended school. This was a huge increase in only 50 years and occurred before the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and even before Brown versus the Board of Education. John Dewey taught and wrote around this time of great change. Change was happening faster than the education world was ready to handle the influx of students and their various needs inside and outside the classroom. Many people at the time had different ideas on how to deal with this change, and John Dewey explored these theories. Some believed that a traditional education was best, while others believed that a more progressive route would work for students. Dewey believed in balance. Dewey believes that
The traditional scheme is, in essence, one of imposition from above and from outside. It imposes adult standards, subject matter, and methods upon those who are only growing slowly to maturity.
at the same time he is critical of the progressive movement.
There is always a danger in a new movement, that in rejecting the aims and methods of that which it would supplant, it may develop its principles negatively rather than positively and constructively.
Though Dewey presents himself as having somewhere in between traditional and progressive, the truth is that he is much more sympathetic to the progressive point of view. Dewey believes that
Education is found in life experience.
and that educators must understand the nature of human experience. According to Dewey, the best way to provide experience for students is through interaction and continuity. Interaction doesn't just mean with the environment and others in the classroom, but rather interaction with previous learning experiences. A person's past, what they learned in the past, how they feel in the present, come together to skew their learning experience. And therefore, continuity is in building of these learning experiences, and that each learning experience builds on previous ones. Through the lens of a supervisor, one could use Dewey's view on experience when observing teachers. A teacher should always think, what are the various ways in which students are experiencing this? Now, of course, it's difficult as a teacher to keep this in mind during each lesson, because there's dozens of logistical things to keep in mind, that the basic principle of what the students are going to get out of the lesson can be lost. Dewey suggests learning occurs through practice. However,
Experience and experiment are not self-explanatory ideas.
and explaining and even understanding this concept is difficult. A student learns something in every lesson. Now that something may be something they see outside while they're spending the entire period looking out the window, but they are learning.
The notion that a person learns only the particular thing he is studying at the time
Is a false one. It is the challenge of the teacher to have students engaged in learning experience that the teacher desires. Dewey noted that one of the weightiest problems of education is isolation of the curriculum from life experience. In his 1916 work, Democracy in Education, Dewey noted,
the scheme of curriculum must take account of adaptation of studies to the needs of existing community life. It must select with the intention of improving the life we live and comments that the future shall be better than the past.
this plan of learning by experience is placed in sharp opposition to the old and therefore has met with some harsh criticism. Both in his time and the present, John Dewey's theory in education and experience and other works have been met with praise and disapproval. His harshest critic at the time was his own Columbia colleague, William C. Begley.
Similar theories caused a softening of the fiber of Greek education 2,500 years ago and doubtless played a part in the decadence of Greek civilization. Progressive education has its virtues, but it also has its dangers.
Today, many see Dewey as a pioneer of modern education. A.J. Rudd, Dean of College of Washington University, praises Dewey.
His ideas are important to education today because we still have not gotten a sense of the importance of learning individually. An individual student brings a certain context and history to his and her learning, and the teacher must know that. Dewey recognized that. At the same time, Dewey recognized the importance of learning in a group or a community, learning from others that are unlike you. That's the essence of a democracy, is that you have many different voices and you learn from those people. And Dewey celebrated that.
The famous professor of philosophy and linguistics at MIT, Noam Chomsky, applauds Dewey as a leader in the field.
Well, John Dewey was the leading American social philosopher, was also, by our standards, pretty radical. I mean, I think his position is correct. Bertrand Russell took very similar positions, and yes, a decent education ought to be creating free, independent, creative human beings. It doesn't have to be developing them, it has to be allowing them to follow those natural instincts. Those are natural among children. The educational system has to beat it out of them and make them obedient and subordinate and so on. But a decent educational system would allow these natural aspects of human nature to flourish and encourage them. And it would be part of developing a free and democratic society of real participation.
Dewey's education and experience has also been applied to modern educational debates. Mark A. Faust, a former English teacher and a member of the Language Education Department, applied Dewey's work to the modern debate of whole language education. He notes that Dewey urges us to refrain from seeking merely the label good and bad practices without regarding larger questions about the goals of education. Adopting this stance, he says, will regard us against falling prey to our own human tendency to go to extremes, which rarely, if ever, result in sound policy. Similarly, Stephen Walk of Northeastern Illinois University applied Dewey's work to his research on joy in school. He said, Dewey's point about the destructive power of our schools should make us ask ourselves some fundamental questions. What is the purpose of school? What disposition about learning, reading, school, and the world and the self do we cultivate? Ask young adults why they go to school, you will hear nothing about joy. He goes on to point out, many of our greatest joys in life are related to our learning. Unfortunately, most of that joyful learning takes place outside of school. This reminds me of the last time I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It was packed. I wondered how many of those people appreciated art during those school years. John Dewey's work is timeless today. Many of the same themes occur in education. I see it at my own school. My metaphor for the different factions at the school is playgrounds. There's one playground where teachers are playing hopscotch and on monkey bars. In other words, using traditional teaching methods, and another playground where teachers are sitting around on their computers. The truth is that both playgrounds need to see the benefit of the other side. Technology must be infused in education if we expect students to be prepared for the 21st century, while at the same time, the importance of the fundamentals ought not to be lost. Personally, I find myself in line with Dewey, leaning toward the progressive with the traditional still in sight. I do so with my own quest to be a lifelong learner. This summer, I had the opportunity to study in France. Despite my 7 years of formal education in the subject, I tend to learn more from my trips to the country than I ever did in a French classroom. For example, I learned the word for mermaid, sirène, because another teacher was able to make the word meaningful for me by explaining the etymology of the word. Though this trip enhanced my knowledge of the French language, I know that I have the classroom fundamentals that were important for me to understand before I could fully appreciate everything the country had to offer. Similarly, I'm currently taking online classes for supervision and will be certified without any practical experience. Does that necessarily mean I won't know what I'm doing when I have a supervisor job? Perhaps. truth is that students need a mix of both. I conclude with John Dewey's philosophy on education in his own words.
The world is moving at a tremendous rate. No one knows where. We must prepare our children not for the world of the past, not for our world, but for their world, the world of the future.